My speech was on the subject of climate change, looking in particular, in some detail, at the science of climate change. And I presented a number of slides which you will be seeing as we go through and discuss what I said in my presentation, what Professor Abraham says in his reply. And let's begin by paying tribute to Professor Abraham, because in our experience, it's very rare for what I'm going to call true believers in the new religion of climate change to be willing to debate with those of us who have our doubts about whether that religion is appropriate. But Professor Abraham has entered the fray, and we give him a merit star for doing that. However, we also take one away from him, because in all the 8 months that he was preparing his talk, which has been very widely disseminated on the internet, on the climate extremist and left-wing websites of every kind, picked up in the newspapers, who are all calling me a complete nincompoop and a fallen idol of climate change. This talk, which was very widely distributed, he didn't tell me at any time during those 8 months of preparation that he was preparing it. Now that is a lapse on his part, and quite a serious one, for 2 reasons. First of all, it is a matter of normal courtesy in academic circles that if you wish to issue a substantial, and particularly in this case, a very angry rebuttal of a presentation done by somebody else, and that's what he did here, a very angry rebuttal, then it is expected, indeed required, it is a rule of academic life, that you let the victim of your ire know well in advance, give him a chance to see what you're saying about him, so that he can comment to you, privately first of all, and therefore you can remove mistakes that you might otherwise have made to his detriment. And that's the normal way in academia, and I regret that it wasn't followed here. And the other reason why the professor ought to have behaved in this way is that all the way through his talk he makes a number of rather snide comments about the inadequacy with which I explained on each slide what data we were looking at and where it came from. And of course, if he was in any doubt as to where any of the data came from, I am relatively high profile, I'm not difficult to find. He could simply and should have got in touch with me and said, look here mate, this won't do, I don't know where all this data came from, you've got to tell me so that I can check it. Now a lot of people do this with my presentations. They get in touch afterwards and they say, we're interested in this slide or that graph or the following equation, where did you get it from, can you explain it? And I always try to do my best to reply in a straightforward and honest and fair fashion to all questions of that kind that I receive. So he could and should have got in touch to ask questions about anything he wanted to understand better in my talk before launching in and attacking it. But why should you bother to watch one person throwing dead cats at another over a question of who is right in a pair of presentations? Well, I think there's one very good reason why you're going to find this, as I've said, one of the most fascinating hours or 2 that you have ever spent listening to anything about the climate. And that is this, that what the professor has unwittingly done is he has provided examples in his talk of all the dubious and dishonest, and I'm going to use that word and you'll see why later, dishonest techniques that the entire climate extremist camp regularly uses in their debate on this issue. And in his talk and the way he has put it together, you will discern why it is that the climate extremist movement, with all the propaganda tools available to them, all the endless funding, all the endless environmental groups supporting them, why it is that the climate extremist movement has failed to get its message through to the ordinary people. Every opinion poll now shows that people are moving away from belief in this new superstition that is an extreme worry about the climate. They are no longer buying the nonsenses of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and they're not buying them for one principal reason, and that is that none of it is true. A lot of it is dishonest, and downright dishonest at that, and that is one of the things you're going to see over and over again as I go through the professor's arguments. And in going through them, I'll be covering quite large areas of concern in the climate change debate. We're going to be covering all the big ones: sea level rise, how much temperature will rise, the melting Arctic ice sheets. All the big subjects are covered in my talk, are therefore also covered by the professor, and will now be covered by me. You'll be seeing many of the slides that I showed in my talk. You'll be seeing some of the slides that are in the professor's talk. But this is an exciting moment because we are going to dissect for the first time in very great detail, and yet in a way which I hope you will find interesting, certainly intriguing, the arguments put together over many months by a climate extremist who disagrees passionately with the more skeptical point of view that I tend to put across. And it will then be for you, on looking at this presentation, to decide who has been fair and honest here and who has not. And I'm not here, and I always say this, I'm not here to preach or to proselytize. I'm not here to try to push you into one point of view or another. I don't do that. What I do is to give you the scientific facts and data, give you an indication of where I got them from, tell you what I think of the data being put forward by the professor, and allow you to decide where the truth lies in each of the individual segments of this program that we are going to put together. So what you're watching now is the introductory segment, and in a few moments we'll be moving on to what the professor says about me, because this presentation by him is essentially a personal attack on me, and it is fair that you should know at the outset what the professor thinks of me. That's part of the necessary background that you should have. What you won't be getting is what I think of the professor, because that's not the way science is done, in my opinion. The way science is done is by simply giving the scientific facts and explaining those facts very clearly, and then allowing it to the facts to speak for themselves. So this is going to be a very gentle presentation, a very irenic, peaceable presentation. I'm not going to be using rude words. I'm not going to be throwing dead cats at anyone. I'm just going to be talking you through the main points of disagreement between us, and then at the end of that you will have some idea of the methods which are being used by the climate extremist movement to try to convince you that climate is a serious problem, and you will then be able to weigh up whether you think those arguments, as encapsulated in quite a comprehensive way by the professor, are arguments which retain any merit whatsoever.